made me do it. Fine, let's get this over with. You made me do it. Fine, here we go. We're going to review it. Versus the customizable card game. So this card game, versus the customizable card game, the CCG card game, as I've mentioned before in my reviews of Overpower, and when I mentioned the Rift rollout video, this game I have issues with. I have problems with it. But I figured that I may as well review it. And again, this is going to, even though I have issues with it, I'll get into those in the appropriate areas in the video. And just talk about the game mechanics as they are, and let you, the viewer, decide if you enjoy this game or not. And then, of course, it's a review by me, so at the end I will give you my 2 cents, a little bit more explanation on this. But here we go. So this is the Versus the customizable card game. This is from Flair. So, so you understand the so that you understand the history to this game. Again, this game came out after repeated attempts to repeat what was established with Overpower. Flair originally started with Overpower. The game went out, and then we had that Recharge and the X-Men from Wizards of the Coast, based on the movies. Eventually, we get to this point, Versus. And it came out, like I said, it was very popular. Lots of sets. People love this game. So let's just walk through it, and here we go. So, this card game had, again, it was actually very simple. As I've noticed as I've gone through these reviews, most of these card games that I've reviewed have been large, for the most part, by and large, very simple in terms of the number of card types that the game's ever released. It was only really, if I look at all the ones I've done so far in these reviews, still so far, Star Trek CCG and Star Wars CCG are by far the worst culprits of just exploding with so many different card types that it makes you go, just start to question why. So this had 4 card types, alright? So we're going to get to it. So the first card type is the bulk and the core of the game, and those are the character cards. So, I have one, I'll show you. Now my theme, in what they really made in Versus was, it was all about the team. So most decks carried a team theme. So mine is a Brotherhood deck. But you would have like an X-Men deck or a Sentinel deck. And then sometimes you would mix cards, mix multiple teams, and they had cards to allow you to really integrate multiple teams. Pretty well, I should say. But anyway, mine's a Brotherhood deck. So here's a character card. And here is the example, and this is Mimic. So you can see it has his name, and then it has the team he's on, Brotherhood. Here's the cost, resource cost to put him into play. Here's his stats, attack and defense, and game text. So there's a character card. And the character cards are the bulk or the core of your game, because they're the ones that allow you to go ahead and interact or attack with the character. As you notice on the name, it had a name and then a sub-name on the bottom. And the reason being is they did come out, there were different persona. I mean, the lack of a better term is persona, like in Star Trek. Let's say people will be aware of that, or Star Wars. But there's different versions of Mimic. So you'd have different versions, and each different version would have a different subtitle. So the next card type that you have would be Equipment. And so here is an equipment card. You can see it has an endurance cost on the top corner, the name of the equipment, the card type equipment, and then game text on the bottom there. Okay? Alright, so you'd have that. This one's a personal force field. And again, that has, an endurance cost. So you pay that much, not endurance, I'm sorry, that has a resource cost. So just like the character's resource cost, this is going to cost you so many resources to play this. Calvin was a 6, this is a 1. So again, they have that card type. Alright, and then the next card type you'd have, the third of 4 card types, would be a plot twist. And here's an example. Okay. And this card, you're going to have the name of the card type, the game text, and then you have a number. Now, this number you notice is a different shade, and that's because it works slightly different. So instead of an endurance, sorry, not endurance, I keep saying that, sorry. Instead of a resource cost, this is known as a resource threshold. So what that means with a resource threshold is instead of actually spending anything, you simply need to have that many resources in your resource row to play the card, but you're not, and that's all it means. So you're not spending anything like you are with resource points. So if you have 5 resources in your resource row, that means that at that time that you want to play a plot twist, as long as you have at least 5, you can play that, no matter how many copies of that card you want to play. So let's say I had 4 finishing moves in my hand, and I had just 2 resource points. And then I had just 2 resource cards in my resource row. You could play all 4 of those, literally, in that turn, because you have the threshold. So you're meeting the resource threshold. It's not a cost, it's a resource threshold. But unlike Mimic, in the previous example, has a resource cost. So every turn, let's say I have 5 resource points, 5 resources in the resource row, I would generate 5 resource points that turn. Kind of like the mana you generate with your lands in Magic. So I would not be able to play Mimic in that case because I only have 5 resource points in that turn. But I would be able to play my Force Field because it has a resource cost, again, resource cost of 1. And that's the difference between a resource threshold and a resource cost. So again, resource cost are going to be characters and equipment. And then the plot twists and locations, which I'll show here next. But the locations and the plot twists, it's a resource threshold. And again, you tell the difference because the number is going to be different colored. A number in the top left-hand corner that's blue, again, as you can see from there, a number in the top left-hand corner that's blue is a resource threshold. The gold number in the top left-hand corner, like you see with Mimic, is again going to be gold for a resource cost. So it's both. So the colors on the numbers will tell you the difference, but also you can tell because there's only 2 card types that have either or. All right. So anyway, so that's the finishing move. Now a plot twist, you can play. The plot twist, there's 2 different variations or types. There's ongoing and non-ongoing. And really they're the same card type, but they function differently. A plot twist, if it does not say ongoing, is a momentary effect. So just like interrupts in these other flashes or flash effects, those interrupts in the other games that I've reviewed, where you play the effect, resolve it, discard it. That's the same thing with a standard plot twist in Versus. Now, if it's ongoing, they're more like effects or events or globals, like I did in those other games. Those ones you will play those cards into the resource row, and then you will reveal them, and they stay active and will continue to give you a game effect while they're in that resource row. So while it's on the table, it'll have an effect. Some effects are continuous. Other cards will require you to exhaust or tap. And if you're familiar with Magic, that means turn the card sideways for an effect, and it stays that way until you start your next turn. In this, it's exhaust. Same effect though. It's tapping basically. So some plot twists, ongoing plot twists, will have you exhaust for an effect. Others will just have an effect period and will stay active and continually kick off constantly. The last card type that we're dealing with in this game is a location card. And again, location cards are always considered ongoing. So you're never going to discard them after the use. You're always going to stay in the resource row once you reveal them or once you play them. So, and here is an example of a location. It's going to have a green effect, a green board color. But you can see it has the name, game effect, card type, and then also that resource threshold there on the top left-hand corner. And again, this Asteroid M has an activate, so it has an activate ability. So you go ahead and exhaust it to do it, to to go ahead and play the card. I mean, to go ahead and have the effect. So those are the card types, and how they work, and the design or layout. Now, they did later on in the game come out with stealth characters, characters that have a sort of a gray-black color to the character color instead of the brown. And stealth characters, or not stealth, but concealed characters, I'm sorry. Concealed characters would play face up on the table still in either the support or front row, but they would be separated from the rest that were not concealed. And concealed characters were basically a way to have a character in the field that would have a game effect that would do something and not being attacked or touched unless some other card effect went into effect. So it's a way to have a character ability go off every turn that would act sort of like a resource ability or a location ability or a plot twist ability, that kind of thing. And sort of have these protected characters that could possibly swing from the concealed area and do damage, and you couldn't touch them. Unless, again, you played another card. So that was one variation they did come out with later in the game that I think did make a very interesting aspect to the game. You're going to have your deck, and you draw 4 cards at the beginning of your turn. And at the very beginning of the game, you can mulligan once. And that means that if you don't like your hand, you can go ahead and shuffle those back into the draw deck and redraw 4 cards. So you can do that once, no penalty, but it makes sense since you only have 4 cards that you're dealing with. 4 cards for your beginning hand. Now, unlike Magic, in this game with Versus, players act consecutively in the same turn. It's just a matter of who has initiative for who goes first in that turn. So if you saw my 2-player gameplay on Animayhem, same thing. It's the same thing with Animayhem. Both players are acting in a turn. It's just a matter of who's going first. Same thing with Versus. It's just whoever has the initiative will go first, but you're both acting in that turn. So you determine who goes first, and then there are certain things that both players do simultaneously, and then what you take initiative for. So the only thing you do simultaneously in Versus is the draw step. So you will draw 2 cards. And that's the default, unless you have some other card effect to kick off or some other changing thing, changing game effect. It is going to be 2 cards at the beginning of your turn. So you draw 2 cards. So effectively, you're going to have 6 cards at the beginning of your turn when you start to do things. So again, you have 4 starting. You start the game. Both players draw 2 cards, and then whoever has the initiative gets to go first. So you're going to put any one card, and it can be literally any card you want. Any one card you're going to put down into the resource row. Then you're free to go ahead and play other cards during your build step. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and play any one card as long as you have the resource points generated by the number of resources down in the resource row. Or if it meets the threshold in case of a location or a plot twist. So let's say I do have a 1-cost character, and I did put down the 1 resource. So let's say I did that. So what you can do, and let's say what I put down was a 1 resource threshold location for my resource, face down. So let's say that's what I did for my first turn. So I put it down. So I would at that turn be able to do multiple things during the build step. I could go ahead and then turn face up and reveal my location that I have. Anything you turn face up does not take away resource points. Anything in the resource row, whether face down or face up, will generate resource points every turn. So it does not detract or add anything having something face down or face up. The only thing that it does having something face down for you is strategy. So if you're trying to bluff your opponent or keep things concealed strategy-wise, then there is something to be said about keeping things face down until you absolutely need them. But this is just an example, so you understand gameplay. So I would put down the resource point. I would reveal the location of 1 resource threshold location. It would be revealed. I now have that relocation ability, whether it's an ongoing active all the time or whether I have to exhaust it. That would be now something I have to use and available to me as a player. So I would be able to use that location now, however I want it, in addition to generating those resource points. So I've decided to reveal that in this turn, let's say, during my build phase. So I reveal that. just because I want to have it active. But either way, it's generating 1 resource point. So now, during the build phase, I can also, if I want to, play this one character that I have in my hand that costs 1 resource point, because I've generated 1 resource point from that location. So I'm going to go ahead and play that, and when you play a character, it's going to go, again, either in one of 2 areas above the resource row. You're going to have 2 rows above the resource row. You're going to have either a frontline or a reserve. Now, that's important because depending on what row you're in and who's in front of them or to the left or right of them is going to determine who can attack and who can be attacked. So put it anywhere, it doesn't really matter because you will have a chance to rearrange before you get to the attack step. So I play it, I've used up my resource points, I'm down to 0 that turn, I can't play anything else. So I would go ahead and have the option to attack. If he has no one there to block or defend, then when I exhaust him, I'm going to hit my opponent equal to the attack value of the character, just like Magic. In this game, you have 50 endurance that you start out with, and that's the equivalent of health. So just like Magic has, I believe 25 is the beginning health, this is endurance you start out with, and in Versus you start with 50. And the reason it's so high is because you're dealing with frankly larger numbers, and they wanted to make the game also last a little bit longer and have a little more give you more time to interact with the comic book characters to make it more interesting. So let's say my opponent did have someone to block. They would then compare attack versus defense simultaneously, and then whoever has equal to or greater than their defense would be stunned. That character would then be turned face down, and then you as a player, as the controller of that stunned character, whether you're attacker or defender, will lose endurance equal to the resource cost of that character. In addition, you also have something called Breakthrough. It's like Trample in Magic, but it's a default that every character has in this system because every character works the same way. So, every character, if they get attack greater than the defender's defense, that difference also hits the opponent directly. Defenders don't cause Breakthrough, it's only the attackers that cause Breakthrough. So all I'd lose as the attacker would be the endurance cost of the character. Then you'd have the recovery phase. And in the recovery phase, you are allowed to recover 1 of your stunned characters. By default, anyone else must be discarded. So if you have only 1 character in the field that's interacting in any given point, you will always be able to restore that character. You'll always keep that character. Unless some other card, such as Finishing Move or some other card, or Magneto, unless some other card prevents that. Normally, if you only have 1 character on the field that's stunned, then you will be able to recover them every turn. So you will always be able to recover 1 character every turn no matter what, normally. But anything beyond that 1 default, and you can choose, if you have multiple characters that get stunned, you get to choose who you keep. But you only get to keep 1, so anything beyond the 1 that you keep will be discarded at the end of that recovery phase, at the end of the turn. The way it works with the 2 rows, where you have the support and the front row, is that a character can only attack a front row character if they are in the front row, or if they have a ranged icon and are in the reserve. If you have a character with flight in the front line, you can attack either as front or as reserve. So a character who has flight and ranged are extremely useful in this game because they can attack anywhere from anywhere. The other 2 things to keep in mind with the game are also team attacks and I forgot the term. It's basically backing up a character. It's reinforcement. There we go. So if let's say you have 2 characters that have a smaller attack value and you want to hit this and you want try to get rid of this larger character who has a larger defense value, you can team attack. So that's the one benefit of being a very team-centric build, which they do encourage because they have that whole team affiliation on every character if they have one, and most of them have one. Then it really benefits you because that's required both for reinforcement and team attack. It has to be matching team affiliation. So, in the case of a team attack, 2 or more characters can actually combine their attack values to hit a single target. Now, reinforcement is, let's say your opponent attacks, again, for the earlier example, let's say that 7 attack character is attacking that 2 defense character. Let's say the attack is happening, and let's say that this defender has actually another, let's say, X-Men character that's actually right next to them in the front row or below them in the resource row, below them in the support row, if there's some character next to them in that way, either behind them or to the side of them, connected that way, then what they can do is they can go ahead and exhaust themselves to negate the breakthrough. But that's a basic rundown on all of the things. I mean, it gets a lot more detailed and a lot more complicated in terms of interactions. So I'm not going to try and get into more than that. I think that's more than enough to give you sort of an overview of this game, which you need to understand basics-wise. So here's the combat interaction rule, generally speaking, that I have a gripe with. You have frontline characters that cannot touch characters in the reserve row as long as the character is directly in front of that character. As a general rule, it does not make any sense. And let me explain this to you. Okay, that's like saying that you have this massive Hulk character and you have a normal-sized Ant-Man standing in front of him, and you can't shoot them. You can't attack them because, and again, this is a general rule. So let's say some character has range who's in the front line. So someone who's got Cyclops, for example, who's got ranged attack capability, okay, and he's in the front row, and he has, lore-wise, a ranged attack that he can do as a basis for his normal combat power, and he even has ranged on his character card. You're telling me that he cannot see and hit Hulk with his optic blast? You're telling me he can't do that just because they're in a line formation? That's stupid. I realize that for card games you have to throw some of that realism out the door, but I think that Overpower did a much better job on creating a much more of a comic book feel and really some kind of level of realism that matched the comic book engagement you see in comic books. This does not. Cyclops should be able to see Hulk and shoot him even if you've got a pint-sized Ant-Man in front of him. Because he's got range. He can see it and he can shoot it. So that it really aggravates me. It makes it feel like, again, as I said in my Overpower review, it makes it feel like a British warfare back in the colonial days during the Revolutionary War. You've got these people marching in line, and you can't, if someone's in front of them, oh no, protocol, you can't hit them, you can't attack them, protocol. Now, in the case of characters who are, let's say, equal size, then yeah, having someone in front of you would make sense that you can't attack them unless you can get around them. Let's say normal human size versus normal human size. That would make some kind of sense. But putting this as a general rule and creating this sort of system of format, it creates it as a problem as a blanket rule for comic book feel. Another example is you're telling me that a character in the front line, even if he has ranged like Professor X, okay, he's a telepath. Okay, so unless you have some telepathic blocker or something going on, then he's going to be able to hit you no matter where you're standing. It really honestly detracted from a comic book feel. Overpower, you had 4 characters. You did have a reserve that you can touch, but that's because lore-wise the reserve wasn't even there. Really, unless you had some special to play, because the reserve by standard rules could not play specials, cannot attack, cannot interact with the combat as it is unless they have some special that illustrates that. So the standard rule in Overpower was more realistic. It was more comic book flavorful. It was more true to a comic book combat than Versus was with Overpower. Because the reserve wasn't in reserve. They were just backup. They would come in. Normally they would just come in after someone was KO'd. In the Versus, you can't touch anyone in the reserve because someone happens to be standing in front of them, regardless of size, regardless of power, regardless of ability. And the only way to get past that is flight. Unless you could fly, that's the only way to get past. So I'm sorry, but that's a major gripe, and to me, it's a major problem. So it really detracts from a comic book experience, unlike Overpower that has the full out, you have three in the front line, and they're going to interact any way they want because they're all just there, and you're going to have fun going at each other. There's no line formation thing. The other problem the issue that's not quite as big, but it's still something that detracts from enjoying the game as much, and that is the fact of resource building. You have to gradually build up to these characters, and you have to have this cost system that you're paying. And it's more of a minor detraction to me because I mean, when is the last time you saw, Hulk, for example, wanting to do a really big punch and put a little more effort or a little more pressure into something, but having to stop and go, oh, sorry, we don't have the funds from Professor X's bank account. It's stupid. But again, it's a minor gripe. I can deal with it. As a game itself, I can enjoy it. As purely the game mechanics itself. And if I ignore the pasted on sort of comic book theme that they try to put onto it, if I ignore that and try to play the game just for the game itself, and then I can enjoy it and I can have a good time playing it. But as a comic book game, there's just this big disconnect between the thing that they try to put on there and the actual game mechanics. I can enjoy the game. I would recommend for people to try it at least once, just as a game to see if you enjoy it. So again, have a great day, and this is the review, and we'll see you later.